Very good.
Speaking of rebirth, a long time ago, in a place far, far away, there was a big bang. First generation of universes happened. A few billion years passed, a few supernovas, a whole bunch of dust, water crystals, and such minerals came together. Sort of started moving around the center of mass. Center of mass became the sun. We coalesced into the what we're standing on now. We don't really know for sure where the water came from. We can't pinpoint it. But about 3.2 billion years ago, we coalesced. We were pummeled by rocks and meteors and the surrounding dust and comets and everything. Collected and covered the ocean, and built up the earth. We gradually accumulated water, but the first water around us was all in the clouds because the earth was too hot. So it took about 1.5 billion years for the earth to cool down enough to get rain. And the first ideas and research is that the earth was totally covered with water to begin with. Wasn't any land in sight. Then plate tectonics kicked in. Started moving things around, made dry land. The first continent that was formed was called Pangaea. And about that time we also had the moon much closer to us, traveling around us much faster. Tides were about 300 feet high, moved very quickly. And so in the intervening time since then, moons moved a little farther away, tides have calmed down. But the ocean is still largely unexplored. In 1934, William Beebe and Otis Barton descended in a bathysphere. It was like a huge cannonball. It was about 5 feet in diameter. 2 guys inside of it. It was hollow. They had 3 little windows. One had a light. 2, each one had a window to look out of. They went down 3,000 feet. It was as much cable as they had. They saw incredible life. People even thought, they're making it all up. Stuff like that can't exist. But in National Geographic, I think in 1932, they had drawings that they had made from what they had seen in the way of the marine life that they spotted. In 1960, nobody thought anything lived very deep, but in 1960, they had to repair a transatlantic cable. They retrieved the cable from 6,500 feet deep. It was covered with marine life, much to their amazement. The deepest part of the ocean is called the Mariana Trench. And the deepest part of that is called the Challenger Deep. Only 3 people have been to the bottom of it. Jacques Picard and Don Walsh went down 36,000 plus feet to the bottom of the trench. The water pressure down there is 7 tons per square inch. And just recently in 2019, a Victor Vankova went down also to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the Challenger Deep, and found marine life all around. It was amazing. Nobody thought anything could be alive that deep. And he also found an empty Spam can in a plastic bag. He spent 4 hours down there with a remote operated vehicle from his bath escape and took pictures and explored the area. So we're just beginning to learn about what's down that deep. We're still finding things we haven't seen before. So now I'm going to give it to Suzann for her to do her part, and then I'll be back.
So during that period of 1930s to 1960s, when the first ocean exploration started, it was also the time of the first LSD experiments. And Freud was also talking about developmental theories in human consciousness. And his psychoanalysis guided many individuals to look deep inside themselves in dreams and in early memories. And this is also the time frame when microscopes and telescopes were expanding our knowledge of what we call the universe, which to me includes outer space, the ocean, as well as inner space, which I call inner wisdom. In 1962, early explorers of the LSD included Houston Smith, who was the author of The World Religions, Timothy Leary, Richard Allport, who was also known then as Ram Dass, who just recently died in December. And he considered himself an atheist during his early life. He's quoted as saying, "I didn't have one whiff of God until I took the psychedelics." These men assisted in a Harvard Divinity School graduate program called the Good Friday Experiment, which was held in the basement of a church while a service was being held upstairs. Their experiment involved 20 volunteers, in which half were given the mushrooms and the other half a placebo. It was the first controlled double-blind study of drugs and what they called a mystical experience. At the same time, Stanislav Grof, a Czechoslovakian medical doctor who, with a doctorate of philosophy and medicine, was also part of early research in the clinical uses of these psychedelic substances in Prague. So it's always interesting when something is happening on both sides of the ocean right about the same time. That he was a principal investigator of that program that systematically explored the potential of not only LSD but other psychedelic substances as well. And Grof received a scholarship for research in psychiatry and became the assistant professor of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. There he continued his research until 1973, when he was invited to come to Esalen here on the West Coast, Big Sur, California. And while he was there, he and his wife, Christina, developed something called holotropic breathwork. And it's still now being taught worldwide. And I was fortunate I never met Stanislav in particular, but I got to go to several different holotropic breathwork programs that were offered in different places by his followers. And doing this deep breathing, it was often done to a variety of loud kind of music and then soft, soothing music. And we would just be laying on the floor and breathing, and there was movement and other things that would come up as part of not using any drugs at all, but just experiencing our inner depths, the inner wisdom, the inner ocean that resides within all of us. That our bodies are made up of high percent of water, and Gary's going to say something about the salt later. So the Stanislav Grof is also the founder of transpersonal psychology, which is defined as experiences in which the sense of identity or self extends beyond the individual or the personal, which is the trans part, to encompass wider aspects of life, love, and reality. He also studied the psyche, one of the fundamental concepts for understanding human nature from a scientific point of view. The English word soul is sometimes also used as psyche, this idea of soul and psyche, and which was introduced from the Greeks, along with the word cosmos, which views the universe as a complex and orderly system, the opposite of chaos. The cosmos and our understanding of the reasons for its significance are studied in something called cosmology, a very broad discipline that covers any scientific, religion, or philosophical contemplation of the universe and its nature, including reasons for why we exist. So cosmology and oceanography came together to inspire this inspiration when I read something in this wonderful book, which is Fritjof Capra was a physicist who was then looking at particles and waves and matter, and he had conversations with all these different people. And this quote from Stanislav comes out of here, or not out of this book, but one called Beyond the Brain. Western science is approaching a paradigm shift of unprecedented proportions, one that will change our concepts of reality and of human nature. It will bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and modern science, and reconcile the differences between Eastern spirituality and Western pragmatism. So in a conversation that he was having with this Fritjof Capra, he described the similarities between the perception of reality that he observed through the psychedelic experiments and those emerging from modern physics. He named 3 domains of cartology of the unconscious. Like Freud, he knew that people return to childhood memories to construct their definition of reality. Through meditation and medication, such as LSD and THC, and even alcohol, people became more mindful, more open, more flexible, rather than seeing things as more rigidly categorized. He pointed out that the ocean is the wave, and the wave is the ocean. Just as birth and death of the embryo and death, that birth is the death of the embryo, in other words, there is no longer an embryo, now there's a baby, and death is the birth of the soul to a higher level of consciousness. He believed that fundamental change begins at the prenatal level, that both birth and death are filled with suffering and struggle because they contain the annihilation of all previous reference points, which was similar to when Gary was talking about the ocean and looking at these people who were going down and seeing things they never saw before. And the deeper they went, the more they just were, there was nothing familiar, just like when we were going into space. And so that this idea, this is what he had experienced through these psychedelic experiments. So when we enter deep prayer or meditation, as well as if we're under the influence of the drugs, just as the ocean explorers discovered those life forms. So the same is coming to an understanding of the differences between solid matter and energy patterns of particles and waves, which was happening then in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and continues, this idea of quantum physics, where again, the telescopes and microscopes expand our ideas both about absolute space and linear time. Objective reality, which can be measured and observed, can only be understood when we apply our subjective analysis to it, sometimes called the truth to these facts, but everything is possible. Some of us learn more objectively, like Gary, and some of us learn more subjectively from our own personal experience, like myself. In the transpersonal domain, 3D space and linear time are shattered. There are memories from distant past of human history, such as a regression or time running backwards, as well as sensing time as circular and simultaneous, such as time tunnels or an experience of a past life, or ideas for future inventions. And some of us have the insight or the idea that we must intervene in something. So we have like a premonition, like the day I jumped up and said, I have to go check on Thea. It just, where did it come from? I just felt that that's what I needed to do that day. And so all of this is like circulation of water in nature, that the ocean is the wave and the wave is the ocean. Can we all agree that when we see that we experience that? The second level occurs when a wave breaks on the rocks and sends droplets of water into the air. For that moment, the droplets are separate, individual entities, but they soon, very quickly, fall back into the ocean. The third state of awareness is similar to when a wave hits the rocky shore and withdraws, leaving a tide pool. This tide pool represents times when we feel separate from the whole. It may take a long time before another wave will come in and reclaim that water, swallowing it back into the ocean. The next stage is evaporation. Water forms when a cloud is obscured and concealed from the ocean. We don't recognize always that the clouds are the same. Yet the cloud is the ocean, and the ocean is the cloud, and eventually falls back as rain into the rivers that flow into the ocean. So we have this circulation going on all the time. And I know on gray days when the color of the ocean is the same as the color of the clouds and it all feels like it's one, that's real different than the other days when it's more bluish. You've got a beautiful, the blue sky, and then the ocean of the blue reflects the sky, and then it's like we're not seeing it quite as clearly. But so the fifth and final stage of birth and death are where the original source is completely forgotten by most of us. When ice forms, snowflakes, and hail, which we had yesterday, just about the time I was writing this, have a representation of separateness. Those little hail things, it's hard to see that they're the ocean. They have a structure and individuality of their own, very different from the ocean. And so these ideas are coming from this conversation that Grof had with Friedrich Capra, and they have Grof is comparing it to an ego death, okay? When the snowflake dissolves and has to give up its individuality, or when those little hail things yesterday that were all over my deck melted, they gave up their individual structure in order to return to the source. For him, this realization created an ecological awareness that is often referred to as the oneness of all life. The study of ecology also did begin with the ancient Greeks, and they were among the first to record observations of natural history. And so Gary's going to go back to talking about the future of our oceanic explorations.
Okay, so the ocean and the weather systems that are around are all interdependent. As the weather changes, the ocean changes. Heat is exchanged back and forth. And there are ocean currents that take, like warm water, flows from the equator and flows north up to the Arctic where it gives up its heat. When it gets colder, it's heavier, it sinks, flows back toward the equator. So you've got these currents flowing. And so this current that's flowing is picking up more fresh water from Greenland melting ice. So that's affecting the density of the water. So it's changing the makeup of the ocean that's had this circulation going, because depending on heat and density of the water. So things are changing. And when that changes, it'll affect the weather on the East Coast, because a lot of the weather on the East Coast is affected by the current, the heat such that's in the ocean. The ocean also responds to various inputs, like it's absorbing more CO2. When the ocean absorbs more CO2, it gets more acidic. When it gets more acidic, it starts dissolving corals and shells of fish. And so you've got this acidification of the ocean going on. and how it's going to affect the corals and the sea life. And also, because the ocean is getting warmer, it's expanding. Warm water expands more than cold water. And so you get the melting ice caps, you get more melt off Greenland, you're adding water to the ocean, you're warming up the ocean, it's expanding, it's taking more volume, and so you got higher tides, we got more flooding along the coasts. And also with the ocean warming up, you get more heat going into the weather patterns that are developing above the ocean. So you get stronger hurricanes and weather systems because they're picking up more heat from the ocean. Makes the weather system stronger. The ocean will continue to change, challenge, amaze, and inform. We have discovered seabed volcanoes, actual volcanoes coming up from the undersea, black smokers or sea vents that are taking incredibly hot water from the mantle and dissolving minerals and coming up and producing all kinds of life forms around them or living on these black smokers. Shipwrecks. They figure that over 1 million shipwrecks are on the sea bottom, and we've discovered but a handful of them. There's seafloor streams, there's lakes, there's waterfalls in the ocean. Places where the density of the seawater is more dense than the surrounding seawater and actually forms lakes of brine, forms streams of brine flowing across the ocean floor. It forms waterfalls that are bigger than Niagara Falls in the ocean, coming off of higher levels, falling down, actual streams and waterfalls. New marine species are being found all the time. Mineral modules that now they feel they want to mine because there's all these minerals laying on the ocean floor. Let's mine that minerals. Well, when we mine that minerals, how are we going to affect the sea life that's down there? And we don't know what else. There may be all kinds of stuff that we haven't even thought of yet that's still down there. So we need to have some consideration and some care about when we start getting into the ocean and mining and exploiting some of the resources of the ocean. Are we doing it in a way that's going to be very destructive, or it's going to help? And we have to consider that every time you take a drink of water, how many people have ever asked for a fresh glass of water? There's no fresh water. It's all been here for billions of years. It's the same water. The water's been recycled and recycled and recycled. It's the water in your glass. It's been in lakes, rivers. It's been in the ocean. It's been clouds. It's been ice. It's been rain. It's nurtured millions of animals and plants. It's circulated through the system. It's ignited fires. When the rain falls, makes lightning, ignites fires. So it ignites fires and it's put out fires. And it's saved lives when you're thirsty, thirsty in the desert, and it's taken lives, like tsunamis. We just happen to be in the way of them. The ocean's just doing what it does naturally. We just happen to be in the way of it. And all the water that the world has ever had is here now. So we have to take care of it and watch how we manage it. Thank you.